Hi everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 of the NSX routing. In this portion, I'm just going to basically demo creating a 2-tier routing environment. Okay, stick around. See you in a bit. Hi everybody, thanks for sticking around. So let's jump right into it. So we last left off, the last demo was creating the segments. So if you didn't watch that video, watch that video on YouTube. It's creating segments and whatnot. So if I look at my environment under networking, if I go to my segments, I got 3 segments. I got web, database, and app. App has 1 VM on it. Database has 1 VM on it, and my web segment here, I've got 3 VMs. I demoed that in that video on creating segments. So if you haven't seen it, watch that. So now what we got to do, so right now the web VMs can actually talk to each other, no problem. So web 1, 2, and 3 can talk to each other. They cannot talk to database or app or database, or they can't talk to each other because, again, we need a router between them. So that's what we're going to do. So let me just switch over to my iPad here and kind of show you what we're going to create. So we'll start off here with the tier 1 gateway, tier 1, and we'll have our web segment, web, which is 172.16.10 network. And my web 1 is 11, web 2 is 12, web 3 is 13. Then we have the app segment, app, and that's the 172.16.20 segment, and the app VM is .11. And then we have the database one. I'll say database over here, database, and it's a 172.16.30 segment, and the database is .11. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to deploy that, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so here we go. Let's go back to here. So this is pretty easy. Let's go into tier 1 gateway. Let's go into add a tier 1. I'm just going to give it a name. Tier 1-gateway-01. Again, I don't have much of an imagination. This dropdown, I believe this is new since 4.0.11. Okay, it's asking us about the high availability mode. Prior to that, your tier 1 was basically just active standby or whatever, right? Sorry about that. Let's see if I. Okay. Now you get a choice here. You go active standby, active, or distributed only. So if you don't plan on having any services at all, right? I just want the DR component. Again, watch part 1 if you didn't know what DR is, okay? If you only want a distributed component, you only want a DR, no SR, great. That's what you pick here, and that's what I'm going to do. If you want to go active standby, for example, I'm going to put a service on this gateway. Maybe I'm going to put the VPN service, the NSX native load balancer. Those run in active standby. Active is new as of 4.0.11, and some services do support that. The ones that they listed, read the release notes on that, was TLS inspection, I believe it was, and NAT, I think, was one of them. I think there's another service there. I don't care about any of this. Selecting any of these 2, you're going to get an SR component, and the SR components we know from the lecture before run on edge nodes. I don't have one. I'm going to go distributed only. That's all I care about. It's asking me, do you want to link it to a tier 0? I don't got a tier 0. I haven't created one yet. So that's pretty much basically it. I'm just going to go save. And I don't want to make any more changes. I just created my tier 1 gateway. Can't get any simpler than that. I'm going to go to my segments. Now this is the part that might kind of freak your mind out a little bit, right? Generally, you create a router, you go in there, you add interfaces to the router, you give it IPs and stuff, right? This is where it's kind of a little different here in NSX under the policy APIs. Let me go to my app segment. I'm going to go edit on the segment. So it says here connected gateways. There's none. There's my gateway. I'm going to connect it to that tier 1. Beautiful. Now, over here on the right, it asks me for the subnet. So this is the app segment. So it's 172.16.20.1/24. And I'm going to save that. And no, I don't want to. Oh, let me close the editing. There we go. So that might not kind of make sense, but it kind of does, because you're saying this segment is connected to this gateway. And by the way, anybody on this segment is going to use this 172.16.20.1 as their default gateway. So it kind of does sort of make sense there. Let me do the database one. Let's connect to tier 1. Let's put in the gateway. So we're really configuring the interfaces now on that tier 1. 172.16.30.1/24. I'm going to save it. I'm going to close editing, and I'm going to do the same thing with web segment. Here we go. Here we go, tier 1. 172.16.10.1/24. Okay, and I'm going to save it. And that's good enough. I'm going to go close editing. That's it. So I'm just going to check everything. Yep, they're all connected to tier 1. I got the right gateways here, 172.20 and 30 and 10. So let me go into my web right now. I'll clear the screen here. Oops. Yeah, doesn't matter. There we go. So let's try it out. I'm going to go ping 172.16.10.12. That's web 2. That should work. It was working before. Going to hit 13. That was working before. Those are all in the same segments. Here's the true test. Let's go to 20.11. This is app. Bingo. It's working. Let's go to database. 30.11. Bingo. It's working. Okay. So so I now have east-west communication. All right. Let's go back to the iPad. So now what we need to do is deploy a tier 0 gateway. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. All right. Let's go to the iPad screen here. Let me get rid of my little iPad only so there's more space. So I got my tier 1, and just want to make sure recording was going. I'm going to deploy a tier 0. Actually, let me get rid of that, what I just did there. I'm going to deploy a tier 0 now. A tier 0 gateway. Okay, so I'm going to deploy this tier 0 gateway. Now, one of the things is I'm going to give this tier 0 gateway an uplink. All right, and once I give it an uplink to the real world, it needs that SR component. And this SR component runs on an edge. So I'm going to deploy 2 edges. I'm going to call this edge 1, edge 2, just for argument's sake, okay? So before I deploy that, I need to deploy my edges. So why don't we go back and do that? Oh, by the way, and I'll also connect this tier 0 to that, all right? So we'll deploy the edges, then we'll come back and take a look at this, okay? Let's go back to here. All right. So let's go into, since our edges are transport nodes, we're going to go into system. Transport nodes are in fabric. So I'm going to go into nodes here under fabric, and I'm going to go add edge node. All right. And this is where I'll type in my host or the name of it, site A-NSX edge-01. And the host name now, the fully qualified domain name, site A-NSX edge-01.vclass.local. That's my domain. Again, my lab environment, I simulate the VMware education because a lot of times I'm doing demos on my equipment. So that looks good. I'm going to, oh, sorry. Then you pick your, sorry, go back here. Then you pick your form factor size here. Okay, we talked about that in the lecture. And then under advanced resource reservations, this is where you can specify your reservations for CPU and memory and stuff. I'm just going to leave the default. It's probably a good idea to keep reservations on your edges in a production environment. Okay, I'm just going to leave the defaults and go next. Now it's asking me the credentials. VMware one bang. Oops. Again, you got to type in this big long password. Hopefully I typed that in right. VMware one bang. Good, they match. I'm going to enable SSH. It's up to you if you want to in your environment. Talk to your security guys. One bang. And VMware one bang. VMware one bang. And I'm going to allow root to SSH in. Again, up to you guys, or whatever you want. I'm going to go next. It's asking me the compute manager. Remember, there's a couple of different ways to deploy an edge appliance. I could do it from an OVF within vSphere. I could do it from an ISO, that type of thing, or I can do it natively using the NSX interface, which I'm doing right now. So this compute manager I'm picking, that's my vCenter server. It's going to deploy it for me, right? So I'm going to pick the cluster it's going to go on. Now, In my environment, I actually have two separate clusters. I have a cluster I dedicated just for edges, which I called edge cluster. Okay, so I'm going to put it on there. Again, you can specify your host and whatnot. I don't think I have DRS enabled on that one. I'm going to put this on host 4, just for argument's sake. And what data store do I put it on? You don't really have to select the host if you got DRS set up. I don't think I'd have it on mine. That's why I'm just being specific here. I'm going to go next. Now it's asking, do you want IP4, IP6, or DHCP address? I'm just going to say IP4. I'm going to go with static address. And this guy is going to be 172.20.10.61/24. The gateway 172.20.10.10. That's in my environment. Your environment's going to be different. Now, remember, this is a VM. And this is the part where you want to select the interface. I'm going to go select interface. Now, I didn't demo this. I probably should have. But I actually, remember, this is a VM, and it's got a network card. So it needs to connect. It's going to have multiple network cards. One of them, this card here, is the management network. So remember, the VM can have up to 5 NICs. The first NIC goes to management. The other 4 NICs you could use for NSX or uplinks and for overlay networks, right? So I'm just going to pick my management network here. I'm going to say save. All right. Now it's asking me for search domain vclass.local. It's asking me for my DNS servers 172.20.10.10 and my NTP on my lab 172.20.10.10 as well. I'm going to go next. So all I did in this screen here is configure the management interface, the first interface, NIC 0 if you want to call it, right? I configured that, and that's on my management network. This has to be able to reach NSX Manager because they got to talk to each other. Now I'm going to go next. Neighbor's banging away there. This is the part where you can get really, where you can kind of go off the rails, right? Sorry, yeah. We'll see if I can, don't know if you guys can hear it, but I hear some banging out there. So this is the part where things can go off the rails, where you specify how do I want to configure the NSX virtual distributed switches on the edge. Do I want 1 switch, 2 switches, whatever? There's a lot to it. I'll probably do a separate video just on that, but I did talk a little bit about it in part 1. So I'm going to create 2 switches here. I'm going to create one for my overlay and one for my my VLAN. Remember, the edge is kind of the boundary between my physical network, the NSX environment, and the real world, the VLAN world. So I'm going to create my first switch. I'll call NSX Virtual Distributed Switch dash, actually no, I'll call it prod dash overlay dash NSX Virtual Distributed Switch. Sorry, keep hearing that thing banging in the background. Now, I'm going to create 2 switches. I'm going to put 1 NIC on each. I'm going to keep my lab environment simple. Now it's asking me what overlay network. This is an overlay one. This is where my Geneva traffic is going to be terminated. So I've got to pick the proper transport zone here. So I'm picking my overlay here. It's asking me the uplink profile. I'm going to pick the single NIC uplink profiles. And I talked about uplink profiles in the host preparation lecture. IP assignment. It knows, first of all, I picked a transport zone here, overlay. It says, oh, you need to create a TEP on this edge. Remember, the TEP's going to terminate my overlay traffic. So it says, how do you want to set the IP on this? And again, I could do an IP pool or a static IP list. I'm going to use that pool I created back when I created my host transport nodes back in that video. So if you haven't seen that, that's where I went in and do it. Now it's asking me the uplink. What it's saying is, okay, what I just created here is a virtual switch on the edge, and I'm going to give it 1 NIC, and it's asking me, where do I want to connect that NIC? The NIC of a VM connects to a port group, right? So I'm going to say, select interface. This is my overlay. So I created a port group on my distributed switch, on my ESXi host, called overlay. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to go save. And that port group's connected to the appropriate network card. I'm not done yet. I'm going to scroll back up. I'm going to say add switch. I'm going to create another NSX distributed switch on this. So 1 switch, I got 1 card going to my overlay. This one is going to go to my uplink out to the real world. So I'm going to call this prod-VLAN-NSX virtual distributed switch. You can call it anything you want, but don't call it switch 1 and switch 2. Make it so it's obviously identifiable. My transport zone, this is going to be a VLAN back one. Remember, the edge is the boundary between your overlay and the real world. So one interface is going to be overlay, that's a TEP, and the other interface is going to go to the real world, right? So that's what I'm doing in this example. What uplink profile do I want? I'll go single NIC uplink profile, and then it's asking me, okay, this network card, what port group is in the real world? And I created one called uplink. Okay, so this is a port group on my distributed switch called uplink, and that's going out to the real world. And I'll save that, and I'm done. I'm just gonna hit finish. I'm gonna have to talk to my neighbor. Anyways, okay, now you look at this screen here, it's not really doing anything. Your best friend here is the refresh button, okay? Now you'll see it's deploying. Now, what I normally recommend at this point is walk away, right? Just take off, go take a break for 10 minutes, right? Come back and check things out, right? So it's deploying. What I'll do is I'll probably speed this up. I'm just gonna deploy my second one now, okay? So I'm gonna probably speed up this video, okay? So there we go. So there we go. I deployed the second one. I'm just gonna walk away from this, okay? That's probably the best thing you can do. Again, the refresh button is your best friend. My lab environment's a little slow, so I'm gonna come back in about 10 minutes, all right? So I'm just gonna let this run. Well, we see that it's finished deploying. It took a little while. I honestly just got up and walked away for about 10-15 minutes. Oh, I clicked somewhere else. Let's go back to that. Come on. All right, so let's go back to our nodes here. So we see that both of them have been deployed. Great. Now, a couple of things you want to notice here. First of all, it says configuration. Well, let me just. It succeeded or it was success. The node status is up, which is great. So green is good. Anything else is bad. You see the TEP IP of each of the nodes. Great, I see that. Now you might look here, tunnel's not available, and you might start to panic, right? That's okay, don't worry. If I click on these little information icons are very, very useful. I've used them a lot. If I click on this, it'll come up, it says tunnels will not be available in the following conditions. The edge is standalone with no layer 2 or 3 services configured. Well, I don't haven't configured any services on that. The edge is in maintenance mode. It's not in maintenance mode, right? So so that's okay. Let's not worry about it. What I have to do now is I need to create an edge cluster and put those two edges in it. So let's select edge cluster, add cluster. I'm just going to name it edge cluster -01. Nothing to. The edge cluster profile, the standard one, the default one, these profiles just talk about bidirectional failure detection and stuff like that, right? So it'll just take the default, which is fine. Maybe I'll do a video on that some other time. But anyways, so I'm going to select both the edges. I'm going to click on the little button here to put them over on the right. I'm going to go add, and it's done. Okay. By the way, when you create your edge cluster, it will not let you add an edge that hasn't completed deploying. So for example, if I go back to my edge nodes, I can deploy multiple edge nodes simultaneously. I do not have to wait for the first one to deploy, then do the second. Then I can deploy a bunch of them depending on how fast your environment is, right? But the node must successfully be deployed before it's allowed to be added to a cluster. Okay. Okay, great. So we've done that. Do I need to go back to my drawing? Okay, yeah, let's go back to my iPad here, right? So let's go iPad only. And so I deployed my two edges. Okay, I'm gonna redraw this part here. I'm gonna zoom in. So I'm gonna put a link here. I'm gonna create a segment. Actually, sorry, from my tier 0 out to my, I got a VYOS router, and then that goes out to my physical, actually. Say physical up there. Okay, so I'm just gonna clear this, and I'm gonna zoom in on this area right here. Okay. So let me just clear this real fast. So if I do this, so essentially what I'm going to do, this is my tier 0, tier 1's down below. I have my one edge here, edge 2, we'll say edge 1. And I'm going to create a segment here going out to my, this is my, actually, you know what I'm going to do this? Let's get rid of that. Physical. Okay, so technically speaking, this is the physical boundary, right? So I'm going to my VOS router here. The interface on it has an IP of 192.168.100.1. I'm going to do this. These are all going to be on the same subnet here. I'm going to do a .2 here and a .3 here. Okay, I need to create this uplink segment here. So this is a segment. I'm going to create an NSX, and it's going to be a VLAN backed segment. Okay, so I still have to create that. So I'm going to create that. Then I'm going to create my, I'll create my tier 0 gateway, connect it to that segment, connect the edges, set up OSPF. That's what I got running. My area here, my OSPF area is area 51. Whatever. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so let's go back to the desktop. Okay, so the first thing I got to do is create that segment. Let me go into networking segment. I'm just going to call it uplink, or call it something makes sense. This is an uplink segment to me to get to the outside world. So uplink segment, right? Transport zone. This is important. It's a VLAN backed transport zone. So it's going to ask me for a VLAN over here. I'm just going to type in 0, okay? That's basically it. That's all I really need to do. And I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to say, no, I don't need to do any more configuration. Beautiful. So I just created that segment. Now, let me go in and create my tier 0 gateway now. So I'm going to go add gateway, tier 0. I'm going to call it tier 0-gateway-01. Again, not much of an imagination. I'm going to leave active mode as the default. It could be active standby. So I'm going to just leave active. If you're connecting to physical routers that don't support equal cost multipathing, then you would probably go active standby, okay? What edge cluster do I want? Again, I'm going to pick edge cluster 01. I have to do that. Notice it's basically mandatory because I have an uplink that I want to have. At that point, I can't really do anything here. All these settings are all grayed out. So I'm just going to click on save. Do I want to continue configuring? I'm going to say yes this time. And at this point, I'm going to configure my interfaces. I'm going to go set, and I'm going to add an interface. I'm going to call it T0-interface-1, whatever. It's external. What's its IP? 192.168.100.2/24. And what segment is it going to be on? It's going to be connected to that uplink segment that I created before, right? Which edge node is it going to be connected to? I'm going to pick edge 1. And then you can modify MTU sizes. Right now, I'm 1500 MTU. We're not dealing with Geneva or anything like that. I'm going to leave the rest of the stuff alone. I can say save. And at that point, I just created one interface. Let me add another. Tier 0 dash gateway dash int. No, I just said tier 0 int dash 2, whatever. And then I'm going to call it 192.168.100.2/24, and a segment, uplink segment, and the edge 2. And I'm going to save that. Notice if I go in here, OSPF says not set. I'll show you that one in a minute. I'm going to save that. Oh, wrong address. Did that on purpose, folks. Yeah, 192.168.100.3/24. Okay. There we go. Now let's try that out again. There's my 2 segments. Great. I'm going to say close, and I'm done. Now, what I want to do is under routing here, so this is where there's kind of a lot of clicking going on, right? So under routing, you'll see I've got, like I can go in and set static routes if I want to, and route filtering using route maps and whatnot. I could also, notice BGP is enabled by default. OSPF is an option, it's disabled. You can either have either BGP or OSPF, not both at the same time. You could also do static routes. So I could do BGP and static routes, just static routes, or OSPF and static routes, okay? So when it comes to dynamic routing protocols, it's pick one, whether it's BGP or OSPF. Or if you don't not use either, that's fine. You can go static routes, pure static if you want to. In my demo here, I'm going to disable BGP. So I'm just going to disable everything on BGP here and save it. I'm using OSPF. Maybe I'll do a video on BGP for the most part. I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to go into OSPF. I'm going to enable OSPF. I'm going to specify the area definition. I'm going to go add area ID 51. And again, you can specify it's a normal area or not so stubby area. You can specify authentication and stuff like that. I really don't care for this demo. I'm just going to say save it. And I'm going to go close. So I made an area definition of area 51. You can specify, again, equal cost multipathing enabled if you want to. I'm just going to leave it. Now, down here, I have to say what interfaces are enabled for OSPF. So I'm going to go set. And those interfaces I created earlier on, I'm going to click on configure interface. From the drop-down, I pick those interfaces and what area it is in. And the type of network is a broadcaster, peer-to-peer type of thing. Do I use bidirectional forward detection? Okay, for failures, I'm going to leave this disabled in my environment. You'll probably have it enabled in your physical world. OSPF, hello and dead timers. Again, that has to match with your upstream. I'm leaving it mine at the defaults here. So I just added that one interface. Let's do the other interface. Here we go. I'm going to pick the same area. They're both in the same area. I'm going to say save. And I'm going to go close now. Okay? Now, all right, so I've done that. I've enabled OSPF. I enabled the interfaces now. All right? Let me just save that so I don't lose anything. Now, there's a couple of things here. Now, under route redistribution, I'm going to click on set route redistribution here. And I'm going to go add redistribution. I'm going to call it a name. I'll call it redist, whatever, redist for redistribution. How do I want to redistribute routes? In other words, my tier 0 gateway has connected networks, and it's going to learn about networks that my tier 1 is going to tell it. And I'll show you that one in a second. So that tier 0 needs to tell the physical world, hey, what networks it's aware of. So that's what route redistribution is. And I'm going to redistribute it via OSPF. So I'm going to say, hey, whatever you learn, redistribute it via OSPF, right? Now, under here, route redistribution, I'm going to click on set. Now, this is where people mess up quite easily, right? So my tier 0, what does tier 0 want to tell the physical world about? Maybe I'll have it tell it about static routes and connected routes, okay? And what about, this is where a lot of people forget this one, the tier 1 gateways that are connected to it, right? the tier 1 gateway that's connected to it, should the tier 0 propagate those routes it learned up to the physical? And I'm going to say yes, connected routes, right? And even put in statics as well. I normally just pick both statics and connected, but generally you can just get away with just connected here if I wanted to. When you talk about services and stuff like that, you'll see NAT and IPsec, all this kind of stuff. That's for various services and whatnot. I'll do videos on that later. But anyway, we're just talking about routing. So I'm actually going to leave my static ones selected as well. And I'm going to say apply. I'm going to say add. I'm going to say apply. And then wow, okay. And then I want it to redistribute via OSPF, yes, and BGP, no. A lot of clicking here, folks, right? But just kind of start from the top, work your way down. I find it's easier to configure BGP. It's less clicking, but that's just me. So, so that looks pretty good. I think I got everything. I'm going to go save. Okay, I'm going to scroll down, say close editing. Great. I still have two more things to do. Let's go to the tier 1 gateway. I now need to tell the tier 1 gateway what tier 0 gateway it's connected to. Right? Notice it says it's not set. So I'm going to go edit. I'm going to go select. There's my tier 0. I'm going to save that. Under route advertisement, again, people forget this one. Go click on this. They forget that I want it to tell the tier 0 maybe about all connected networks and any static routes and stuff like that. This is a very common mistake. If things aren't working, they forgot to do that. So I'll click on save. All right. So I'm pretty much done at that point. Let's close editing. Okay. And let's go into here. Let's go into, where's my web? Web 1. Let's launch the console. I had closed it down earlier. Okay. So I already showed you, we got east-west going on. My physical world is ping 192.168.70.1. Come on. Boom. That's my real world. That's beyond my VOS router. Remember, my VOS router was ping 192.168.100.1. That was the VOS router. There it is there. And on the other side of that, it's my physical network. That's actually my gateway to the internet, by the way, right? Bingo. So now I have north-south and east-west going on, okay? A couple things I want to point out here. By the way, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that. Hopefully, thanks for sticking around this long. Let's go into, where do I want to go? NSX here. Let's close down all these tabs so it keeps things a bit neat. All right, let's go back into system, nodes, and I'll do a thing on troubleshooting as well. If I refresh this, there we go. Notice the number of tunnels I have right now. I have 4 tunnels that are up, okay? Why is that? Well, I have 3 hosts. Host 1, is it 1, 2, and 3? Yeah. So let's go back let's find out. Let's go to host here. My cluster. Yeah, host 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Let's go back to my nodes. So I got 4 tunnels. So edge 1 has 4 tunnels. It's got 1 tunnel going to edge 2. It's got 1 tunnel going to host 1, 1 going to host 2, and 1 going to host 3. Why does it have a tunnel to each of those? Host 1, 2, and 3 actually have VMs running on top of each. If host 3 didn't have any VMs running on it, I would only have 3 tunnels. Okay, so this is a good thing. So if you see 3 here, 2 here, 4, you got to figure out, like, is a VM running on these transport nodes, yes or no? Okay, and again, same thing with the edge here. What I probably should have done is, once I created that tier 0 gateway, I should have probably just come back to here. When I create the tier 0 gateway, I actually will see 2 tunnels. Edge 1 to edge 2 and edge 2 to edge 1. It would show 2 tunnels, right? Sorry. But let me back up a second on that one. Edge 1 would show 1 tunnel, a tunnel to edge 2. Edge 2 would show 1 tunnel, a tunnel to edge 1. Okay. So that's basically it. I got north, south, east, west. I'll do a video probably on BGP some other time and a little bit on troubleshooting some other time. But for the most part, that's it. It's a lot of clicking, folks. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you found this beneficial. If you did, smash that like button. Also, please click the subscribe button. That really helps the channel out a lot. It'll allow me to build more content. So thanks a lot. Have a great day. See you later.